Hello, and welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And today we're going to be discussing the 2015 film SICARIO, an action thriller movie directed by Denis Villeneuve, who we've covered before, I think once or twice.
Yeah, we covered Enemy, at least.
Yes. Starring Emily Blunt, Benicio del Toro, and Josh Brolin. Shot by Roger Deakins and scored by Johan Johansson, who has done a few scores I've liked. So
has he? I thought he was Hans Zimmer at first.
Oh, really? I know him from Arrival, which had a great score.
Oh, you know what? That makes sense now.
And
then.
Speaking of that, I think, just the first thing that struck me is that while watching this, I'd never seen it before, was that Denis Villeneuve has been really pretty versatile with his filmography, I should say. Like, this is completely different from Enemy, which is completely different from Arrival, which will probably be completely different from Dune or something. So I was struck that he's been able to traverse a number of genres and styles with his films.
He has. I actually, I was about to say The Blade he did. He didn't do Blade. What the hell? Blade Runner.
Blade Runner?
The Blade Runner he did was also very good. Yeah, he's very versatile, which is interesting. And also, I've seen most of his filmography. I've also seen the film he did with Jake Gyllenhaal called Prisoners. That was a little more of a thriller, which had some things in common, I think, with Sicario in terms of the intensity of it. But but no, yeah, he's very versatile. I'm very excited to see what he does with Dune.
Yeah.
But I suggested this film because I love this film. I've seen it now, I think, 3 times, and it's, it has its issues, but it's consistently entertaining and very tense.
Yeah, I feel like it is one of those films that will, is very rewatchable and revisitable, because I feel like this time I was kind of just caught up in the drama and the suspense. And then, I'm thinking about revisiting it, and there are other things to explore, like the finer points of the plot or the context or just the the world these characters exist in, and it's just entertaining. So it is one of those films that has a high rewatch value, I guess.
I mean, there are decisions that Villeneuve makes, which I appreciate, which he does fairly consistently. He makes these sort of, I wouldn't consider them all that odd, but I guess initially watching them, they were definitely kind of
unconventional, maybe.
Unconventional, yeah, like the whole subplot he decided to put into this film where it's just a Mexican policeman.
Yeah. And
for most of the film, you're like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And then he finally ties it together.
Yeah, oh yeah. And
I mean, full spoilers on this, like as all of our episodes, but why don't we go more chronologically and then we'll get to that point.
Yes. So the film opens on a rather high level of intensity. I was surprised that we opened the film and Emily Blunt, who just, as with everything I've seen her in, she does amazing in this movie, I think, enters a real house of horrors. Like, I was surprised how, like, it's not graphic per se, but it was extremely, like, They tear down the walls in this Arizona house, and it's just like dozens and dozens of like body bags and people decaying in the walls. And shortly after, 2 officers get killed by like some sort of booby trap or bomb that was planted in the shed. And I was just, I was kind of, usually with these sorts of films, you kind of build up to the more thrilling set pieces, but this one kind of...
Yeah, like normally with an action film like this, even if you started with them doing a raid, there might be more of a chase involved, and then you'd end up at a place where maybe there were a couple bodies, but this is like, there's like 30, there's some insane number, like I think it works out to be 40 bodies in the walls.
Yeah. And it goes into I feel like it goes into I don't know, details that other action movies don't. Like after the explosion, you see her in the shower washing blood out of her hair, and you see like the officers vomiting outside because of how like sickening it is and the intensity of the smell. And I feel like details like that really work too, which are employed across the film.
Yeah, in a weird way, this film has a lot in common with Silence of the Lambs, which I wasn't expecting. But there's a few, like, I don't know if they're on purpose, but there's a few things where I'm like, is that a visual nod to, like, Silence of the Lambs? And
yeah, I could see that.
This raid in particular made me think of, like, the SWAT team that goes to get Hannibal near the end of Silence. And
Yes. Yeah,
and the bodies in the wall seemed very Silence of the Lambs.
I agree. Certainly drawing on that imagery. And also just because Silence of the Lambs is an amazing thriller, horror, whatever you want to call it, that has had influence on basically everything that came after it.
Well, it's also similar where they intentionally have I wouldn't say meek, but it's intentionally your protagonist is a female that isn't like 7 feet tall and like built like a linebacker. She's like
yes.
fairly small woman. And she's usually surrounded by much larger, more aggressive men.
Yeah, who she's not entirely comfortable with, especially.
And as we find out, she shouldn't
No,
be.
yeah, absolutely not. The film isn't really like this, but getting into the more thematic qualities of it, the other film I thought of, oddly enough, was Suspiria, which we've also covered, not because of they're not very similar in terms of plot or style or anything, but in terms of the theme, it's about this kind of these layers of violence and this violent environment where even retributive acts are extremely questionable, and there's this kind of just ceaseless conflict going on, which Emily Blunt is the quickest to call out of anyone in this movie. Whereas the men around her, although they're working for the American government ostensibly in the name of stopping drug cartels, they're rather like sadistic at points and unnecessarily violent and just acting illegally. And I found that the film, I'm really just getting to the end sequences at this point, which I shouldn't be getting ahead of myself.
Well, it's fine. We can always double back.
But there's so much context to get to this point, but essentially Benicio del Toro's character, who has been working with the CIA, and again, another amazing performance. Like, I actually don't think I've seen Benicio del Toro in many movies, but
I haven't, and he's he has his versatility in terms of the roles he'll take, but I think this is, I try to think like, well, what's been his best performances, and like, I think of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but like that's sort of an over the top.
Well, that's a very different type.
But
of
this
film.
one is like he is just chilling and he barely speaks. So
yes, capital A acting in this movie. He conveys so much just with, I don't know, just with his kind of.
And as an interesting side note, I've been watching Tales from the Crypt, and there's an episode he's in. Where he's a very young actor, and man, he has grown by leaps and bounds.
When was which series is this? Because I know there have been several.
Tales from the Crypt. I believe it was the 1994. I think it's season 6.
Oh, okay. So he would have been significantly.
He plays
younger.
like a bouncer in a strip club, kind of a thing.
Oh well, I have to seek that out now. Just because I think it would be funny.
Terry O'Quinn's in it too. And Tales from the Crypt is interesting, where you'll find like Brad Pitt's in it and all these like early actors, and you're like, what the hell? Like,
is it a good? I know we're getting a little off topic here, but just because
not really. It's not. Do you mean is the show good, or is that
the show
episode?
good? Is the show good?
I think the show is good, but it's definitely. It's like a horror comic. Like, it's intentionally supposed to be sort of. I basically realized the other day it's adults Are You Afraid of the Dark or Goosebumps. Like, it's the same kind of cinematography
yeah.
and the same kind of pacing and
Energy.
like length.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Dutch tilts
Oh,
involved.
this is a discussion for another day, but Dutch angles, I seldom like Dutch angles, but I see them used all the time, especially in like,
I don't mind them if it's like a
yeah.
kitschy horror thing because it's like
Yeah.
it's used almost ironically,
I
but like so much stuff uses it unironically, which is like, oh, okay.
I just remember this, obviously if it's purposeful and it works well, it's good, but and it can be funny in the kind of kitsch sense, but I just remember watching this episode of the Sabrina show, which is just terrible. Don't watch it. But
Which one is that
the Chilling
witch?
Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix.
Oh, I got a couple episodes in and I was like, not for me.
It is not good. I was drawn to it by the over the top Satan stuff, but it is not good enough to warrant watching.
I mean, I love what's her face, the woman that plays Sabrina,
Kiernan
or the young woman.
Shipka.
Yeah, because I really loved her in Blackcoat's Daughter.
Oh yes, we should do Blackcoat's Daughter at some point. But
We should, yeah.
There was this episode that was shot almost entirely in Dutch angles, and it made me so.
Oh no!
But
See, it works. It works as a counterpoint, and it works in something that's supposed to be like, for children, or like a drawing on the style of a comic book where it might use that in a panel, but as a whole episode, that's
it was, and those aren't like 20-minute episodes, like
no, they're
they
like
honestly
40,
probably
aren't they?
should
45.
be. They're like an hour long.
Geez.
They're like an hour long. Yeah. But anyway, getting back to Sicario, which
has no Dutch tilts.
See.
Not that I remember.
I don't think I noticed any. Because Roger Deakins is much more even-handed with his cinematography.
I mean, he's one of those guys that I'll admit to a bit of ignorance, like, for a while in terms of like cinematography. Like I guess like a lot of people didn't look into it and just assumed, oh, it's the director. That's who makes the look of the film. But no, like cinematography has a lot to do with it. And Deakins has like done some of my favorite cinematography. So
yeah, no, I mean, I feel like the way he shoots landscapes in this film and the kind of fluidity of his camera moves. I mean, and I do like how he makes the violence, like, it's not really voyeuristic. You don't get much enjoyment out of the violence. I remember, the scene where they're driving in Mexico and they pass like dismembered bodies hanging from a bridge, and a different type of director, cinematographer, might have gone in for like the gory close-up on that, but
yeah, like the face, or just sort of like
the mutilated
favoring
areas.
the body or something.
But here the shot is they're just passing by and you just see it through the car window as part of the scenery, like it's just part of the environment, which it's normal to see that out there, and that is, very thematically appropriate. But it was shots like that stuck with me. But suffice to say,
yeah. But let's, I guess, go chronologically to bring us up to the point where they're in Juarez. After the raid, Emily Blunt is called in. I believe she works for. Well, she's called into the Office of Homeland Security, I think. Something like that, and
Department of Defense or Justice or something.
We're cutting in between her in the hall with one of her friends.
Played by Daniel Kaluuya, surprisingly.
Yeah, Get Out's Daniel Kaluuya, who does a good job as a supporting character, though he's not really favored.
No, he doesn't get as much emphasis as the others.
But we're cutting back and forth between them in the hall, and then it's a meeting, and a number of people, including Josh Brolin, and they're discussing some sort of task force, and you can tell that the task force, there's something weird about it, because Josh Brolin is very weird. He's wearing sandals.
Yeah.
It's like a Department of Defense thing. Normally people aren't wearing sandals to those meetings.
Yeah, he gives, throughout the entire film, and in some ways I find him almost as disconcerting as Benicio del Toro's character.
I mean, he's disturbing in the way that he represents that part of the U.S. government that has existed for quite a while, that is basically just trying to create or overthrow coups and like
Yeah.
deal with politics globally just by inciting incidents of violence, and they just don't really think about it.
Yeah, well, the thing that in every scene, basically every scene, he's just acting so casually about what he's doing, like that attitude of him like being in like sandals and board shorts or whatever. It just carries.
I mean, you get the sense that he's either a sociopath or has seen so much violence in some sort of wartime that he's just completely numb to it all.
Yeah,
But not in a like still sympathetic way, in a like, this doesn't bother me anymore, let's make
like
jokes.
it's. I mean, this is a big comparison to be making, but I'm reading a lot about, Holocaust perpetrators and things like that, which is a big comparison again. But a lot of them were ordinary men who just thought of it as their work, and that's literally what they thought they were doing. They didn't think of it even as violence. They just, they were just, that was their job, and it was as normal to them as, an office job or something like that. And I feel like...
Yeah, you see that with well, I saw this, they had interviews with this guy, the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski.
My dad talks about that a lot. He said it was...
And you see that with him, too, where they interview him, and he's just so calm and collected about it, and he's just like, it was my job, so I did it. Even though he'll go into like, so sometimes they want me to burn off the face, so I would, or I would do this or that because it'd be requested. But he's always just like it's the job,
Yeah, I mean, it's a very disturbing and obviously pernicious mentality that has done a lot of harm. But I feel like...
I think some people hop into it because there's something about if it's your job, psychologically, I guess you don't have to think about it as much as if it's like, I'm doing this for a personal reason.
They want to dissociate from this violence. Like, if that is your job, it's almost like a survival tactic in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about it a lot in the military too,
Yeah.
like kind of like just following orders, but then you hear about what they did, and it's like, oh my god.
It's unspeakable. And again, getting back to the thematic qualities, I think one of the things the film does really well is in its various characters, embodying all of these different attitudes toward violence. Like, you could think about it, the characters in those terms in a way, like each one is a different, represents a different sort of approach to violence. Like, you have Emily Blunt, who is not a pacifist, but, she doesn't carry out violence with pleasure. Like, it's only when it's essential.
No, she's like someone at the early stages of having to be around and commit terrible violence, where she clearly is being very traumatized by all of it.
Yes.
Mostly because a lot of it happens at her or to her.
Yes, well, I mean, she takes quite an amount of suffering across this film's runtime, so I would not blame her for the trauma.
Yeah, but then you got someone like Josh Brolin that's like the more almost bureaucratic, like...
Yeah, and I would even say that the Victor Garber, who plays the like head honcho, the guy with gray hair or whatever, he's just as complicit as anyone else in the violence, but to him it's literally just paperwork after a point. Like, he's just embodying the arm of the government that...
Yeah, I mean, he's like the most bureaucratic, where he literally is just signing off on these things. And at one point is telling Emily Blunt, who's, and we'll get to this part, but who's very horrified like by what they're doing, and he's like, listen, it's like above my pay grade that's signing off on this, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and then obviously you have the more personal elements of violence with Benicio del Toro. With the cartels, you have economically motivated violence. So the film really encompasses you in these different perspectives.
I mean, I think what I find so compelling about it is, whatever. I'm a big action movie fan. I'll watch whatever dumb action movie, and like
Yeah.
a lot of the time they are dumb.
Yeah.
Like I can't even pretend. Because, primarily it's about like, the set pieces and the explosions and the fight choreography.
Yeah, it's purely aesthetic.
But, often it's like, one of my favorite action films is Die Hard, which is like, you couldn't get more black and white, where it's like John McClane, good guy. And
Alan
then
Rickman,
Hans Gruber
Hans
and the rest
Gruber.
of the German terrorists, for some reason in the 80s, bad guys. This film, I guess Emily Blunt would be the good guy, but...
Well, the perhaps the audience insert,
I mean,
maybe.
the audience stand-in is obviously, but they really do a great job of Villeneuve does a great job of, and the performances of, you're not really sure who to side with, because you obviously don't like the cartels, because it's been established like they just murder people at will.
Yeah.
And that's horrible.
Yeah. But when
But
he's...
then it's like the task force they get and Josh Brolin, they murder people at will too. So it becomes this thing of like no one wins,
Yeah, and again, the cartels are awful, but you go to the drug lord's house at the end with Alejandro, and one of the things he says in their conversation is like, the U.S. basically was the original perpetrator of this sort of violence, like all the way back to, imperialism and...
Yeah, basically we learned it from watching you.
I mean, the U.S. directly contributed to this. I mean, in many ways created the conditions for cartels and things like that. And that's the truth all over the world.
Yeah, at one point Josh Brolin is sort of in a little heated argument with Emily Blunt's character, and he basically says, like, yeah, it'd be great if like 20% or 30% of the US population would stop snorting this shit so we wouldn't have to deal with this, but they're not going to, so this is what we have to do.
Yeah. So that's just a great moment, because it points to how this runs all the way down to like the average person who doesn't even think about this stuff.
They don't go into it, but it's like any film you're seeing where it's a bunch of socialites and they hop in the bathroom to take a snort, like,
where is that coming from?
This is how they get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
But it's, filtered through so many layers of different people that you would never even have to see anything close to. So, I guess in a way it almost is like... our goods, like all,
Yeah.
We have all this stuff from China and we never even see close to like the conditions or the people that are making our clothes or products.
Well, I think the most damning insight of all of that is the implicit implication that violence of some sort is basically at the root of modern society, even in our own lives. I don't think about where I get my goods from, like my phone. I mean, it's probably mined in Africa by children.
No, and most people don't, because it's not even that it's too much. It's not something that comes up.
There are so many stages of remove between the end product and the original thing that needed to be done to create the end product, that nobody, not even the people who are carrying out the violence, like the people in this movie, nobody feels really responsible for any of it. But the truth is that we're all responsible, because we're all part of it. And that...
Yeah, down to the
consumer.
The smallest...
Yeah.
person, or like some cog in the wheel, like the Mexican police officer who's distributing drugs, and you can get into, well...
I mean, he doesn't think about...
Because if we had just seen him and we didn't get the backstory, you would have just thought, oh, it's a crooked cop, it's a crooked Mexican cop. Well, what a surprise. But they do a great job of showing you, like, he's got a family. He's, like, a pretty nice guy. He's, like, literally doing this because you get the sense he would probably get killed if he didn't.
Yeah, and he isn't thinking about the ramifications, really, of the... He's just trying to get by.
No, he's just like, fuck, let me just get this over with so I can go back on with my life.
basically the reason that they keep cutting to him and his family across the film, and the reason he centers the very moving conclusion of the film, is that he is this kind of average person who is caught up in this, but is made to feel the full consequences of it just because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And I think, initially when I first watched it, I got what he was going for inserting those scenes, but I was sort of like, I don't really get it. But having since watched the film, it makes sense, because it's like, if you didn't have him, you wouldn't have any other regular
person,
like Mexican citizens. It would just be like Warzone Juarez, and we'll get into that because that's like the immediate next thing. But obviously people from Juarez are not huge fans of this film. It's like anything where, like, there are, like, the critique is like, yeah, wow, we're real intense. Come check out our Costco or whatever. Like,
yeah, well, I mean, there is...
there is violence, but, like, I've lived in areas that supposedly have a lot of... that do and did have a lot of violence. And it's not something you see day to day. It's like... it's not like you leave your apartment and it's like, oh my God, people are just shooting at each other and like people are making the handoff. It's like, no, this is for film because it's just easier than having to go into like the nuanced, like most of the city seems fine, but then there's maybe an alley and a back door.
Yeah. I mean, it is dealing in the structure and the imagery of an action movie.
Yeah, and they do, like, I brought up Warzone because they do try to make it look, because it makes sense. It's like, so anyway, I mean, it'll just be easier to do this. So Emily Blunt agrees to be on this task force with Josh Brolin, and he says they're going to go to El Paso, and she, doesn't really think that much about it. The next day she hops on a plane, and we meet the Sicario, Benicio del Toro's character, whose name I always forget.
Alejandro,
yes. Who is clearly sort of weird, because she's expecting, law enforcement.
And he's not.
And he's very clearly not law enforcement.
And he remains ambiguous about,
And, she asks him, like, what do you do? And he's just like, oh, I specialize in the cartels. And she's like, okay. And, at one point he drifts off into a nap. And his, like, whole body starts to shake, and he wakes up just sort of screaming, and she's like, ugh. Like,
yeah, I mean, they do it is the mystery around him is well constructed, I think, early.
And they do a good job, too, of having him be this sort of... He's involved, but he's not involved. Like, he really is like he's just like a liaison, like... So they land... And they're at a military base, and Emily Blunt is clearly like, I don't really understand what's going on, but okay. And they end up in this briefing where there's Texas Marshals, there's clearly some kind of, like, paramilitary group, like one of those, like, private contractor paramilitary groups that people can hire. And then there's Emily Blunt and Josh Brolin and, Alejandro. And so they're like, all right, we're going to go in, we're going to cross the border, we're going to do this and that. Okay, cool, done. And everyone leaves, and Emily Blunt's like, what the fuck is happening? Benicio's in this nice suit while everyone else is in, like, tactical gear and stuff.
It's just...
he's just like, you won't get this, but just follow along.
It's very... I mean, she joins it because she thinks... she'll be able to bring the perpetrators of what happened at the house in Arizona to justice. And then they just immediately put her into this situation where, first off, it seems to have nothing to do with this. And they're deliberately not explaining what's going on to her.
Yeah, they're deliberately keeping her in the dark, and... The next half an hour is, like, some of my favorite in the film because it's just her being, like, escorted from place to place, meeting these new people and just being like, why won't anyone tell me what's actually happening? And nobody will. They're just like, oh, we're doing a thing. She's like, but what are we actually...
And obviously all of that is completely contrary to just the notion of justice itself. Like, it should be.
Yeah, it seems chaotic and sloppy, even though it's somewhat organized.
Yeah, and
And it seems sort of sketchy.
Cryptic in general. Like, justice, it should be a logical, transparent process in most cases. But in this case, they're just kind of like ferrying her around, going from like one like questionable scene to another. There's a scene on the highway or wherever where they
which is one of my favorites. They do such a good job of making
suspenseful and
this very intense, like storming the castle type of thing. So it's like, a bunch of black SUVs, and like they have a border lane clear, so right away like, okay, something's up.
Yeah.
And they're just driving in to Juarez, and they do a great job of making their entry into Mexico, and Juarez in particular look very scary.
Yes. I mean, the I might be confusing the sequence. Wait. Did I mention the shot of the bodies hanging earlier?
You did, yeah. That's what I was tying this back to.
It's filled with ominous signs, and it just the sight even of the of them in the cars parading through the streets.
And it's such a good shot because they're not in any way really favored. They're just driving, and then there's like decapitated bodies hanging from the bridge. And I forget the character's name because I'm always terrible with this, but there's an actor in the front. He's wearing glasses, and he's just such a creep.
Yeah,
and he has been because she's sort of been talking with him since they've crossed the border. And he's like, they do that because you think, well, they must have done something really bad to have been killed like that. And he just starts going, it's genius, it's brilliant, and it's just like, oh my. Good Lord, who is this person?
It's very disturbing. It's just a bizarre...
Because it's like, he's not even horrified. He's just impressed. He's like, wow, nice job.
Well, that's the thing. Like, the fundamental dialogue between the two groups is just, whether it be the U.S. or the cartels, is just violence. And the idea, like, it's almost like he's, like, thinking, like, that's a good tactic. And...
It's almost like he's taking notes.
Yeah, it's like, it's because the U.S. is trying, basically, is operating like a cartel functionally in some scenes with the way it hurts and terrorizes people, and there's more similarity between the two groups' methods than the two groups' methods. Then there is difference. The only difference really is just one of motive.
One is government sanctioned and the other isn't.
Yeah, what are we, like, are we pretending this is for U.S. justice, or are we calling it for what it is? And as the case with the cartels, it's just about power and money and trafficking.
But so she discovers that basically they're picking up, it's one of the head... Mexican cartels, I believe it's his cousin.
Yes,
something
I think
like
so.
that. It's someone higher up on the chain that's related, and they're bringing him back over to U.S. soil. And you realize that they need that many armored vehicles, and the escort from the Mexican police, and trucks with guns on them, and all this stuff because. The cartels know that they have this guy in custody, and they're going to try to take them out to get the guy back.
Yeah.
And then you get this really tense scene where they're, trying to haul ass back to the U.S. border, and they get stuck in a little bit of traffic at the border because there's a car that's stalled out.
It's like, it gives you those, like, like pit in your stomach when you see situations like this, because that it's inevitably going to go somewhere bad. And especially with the music and the editing is very purposeful in that sequence. They do kind of expertly stoke that tension and that sense of unease.
They do, because they for an action film, and this is one thing I appreciate about Villeneuve too, even though initially he's a lot like Nicholas Winding Refn, where initially when I started watching their stuff, it was so patient that sometimes I'd be like, well, come on, just like move. But you start to appreciate it because it works so well.
Well, it has
counterpoint to the
payoff.
typical stuff, which would be MTV edits and just like, really zoom in.
Yeah. It pays off.
But yeah, so they do this great sort of Hitchcockian, tense scene where it's like you see a car and you hear over the radio, like, there's a car over here. It might be, and it looks like just like Latin guys with tattoos, but you're like, well, it might not be them. It might just be random people.
Yeah.
But then another car kind of shows up. And
and it just...
Eventually they realize, like, all right, there's a gun, and it's sort of this, like, pardon the shitty pun, but Mexican standoff. And this is one of the first scenes in the film where you realize, like, okay, this task force is fucked. Because, like, they just get out, and then they just take machine guns and kill them all.
Yeah. It's like absolutely psychotic. And
it's to be fair, it's like, they can say it's a standoff situation and that they did have weapons and they were sort of planning to shoot them.
No, it was definitely...
But they don't, like, draw them. Like, they're in the hands, but they're not... Well, I think one of them goes to shoot and then they just unload on everybody.
It's maybe understandable in some ways, but it's not the type of behavior you want to see from representatives of the U.S. government, especially, if you're Emily Blunt in the car, like... No,
but at the same time, they do a good job of making her complicit. Yeah. Because she tries, verbally she tries to stop them, but she can't, obviously. And then someone tries to shoot at her through the car, and she ends up shooting whoever that was.
Yeah.
And I think that was I think that's one of the Mexican state police or something like that.
Yeah, I forget. It was slightly unclear to me at the time, but...
It was, I will say, I've seen this film 3 times now. I still don't entirely know who that was, but I think that was by design. You're sort of supposed to be in her head where you're like,
who it was,
not quite sure if it's a civilian or law enforcement.
Yeah. But the important thing is that she took a life, and it doesn't...
That she also takes a life. So even though she has her moral standard and she really hates what they did, she's complicit because she also killed somebody there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they bring in this man, and thus begins this, long train of atrocities.
Yes.
But there are weird moments of levity, like at one point, Alejandro's in the hall, and you never really figure out who the other guy is, but he meets up with this other older Latin guy, and they're speaking in Spanish, and he's like, how's your kids? And he's like, oh, doing good. And he's like, well, I believe he's supposed to be a prosecutor or something, because he's like, you should probably not be in the room when I do the stuff I'm about to do. And he's like, okay.
I think it was a prosecutor.
And one sort of inexplicable thing too, and it's been 3 watches now and I haven't figured it out. So Alejandro grabs this like bubbler, this big, thing of water, and he brings it into the interrogation room. And they favor it, so you assume he's going to do something with it. Like, oh, are they going to waterboard this guy? Is he going to beat him with the water tank?
Something.
But it's actually much more clever than that, where I think it's just an excuse for him to go into the room.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. I would need to rewatch.
Because he's just like purposely carrying this water jug, brings it into the room, and they're like favoring it, and he like puts it down. But I think it's just I'm pretty sure it's just an excuse for him to like, go in the room.
Yeah.
But so they're like doing the typical interrogation, and then Josh Brolin's like, oh, we have someone you might like to meet. And then they intentionally shut off the camera that's filming. and they leave the room, and it's this very... I mean, I was going to bring this up too. There's sort of this intimidation tactic that Alejandro uses that, to be fair, would probably work, but also has not so vague homosexual undercurrents.
Yeah, there is a...
Well, like, he literally steps up to this guy and, like, spreads his legs and just puts his crotch in his face and just sort of stands there.
Yeah, there's like a... What... I mean... I felt like there was almost, like, bordering on a threat of rape, honestly, of some kind.
I think that's what they were trying to go for, like...
Which, I mean...
And to be fair...
It would probably scare
make it
somebody.
more intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, it would scare somebody, but it feels like... I mean, in my opinion, this is, I guess, not too much of a hot take, but, I mean... torture in general is just deeply, deeply wrong, and it doesn't
I know that's a controversial statement, but
it's not really a controversial statement, but like, it doesn't usually, in real life, it doesn't really usually work to get people to confess something. Like, if they don't confess it on the first try...
No, because so often, and I've seen so many documentaries on this, people get so fatigued, they'll just be like, fine, I did it, just stop.
Like, I mean, like the witch trials in Salem, classic example, like, if you torture people long enough...
I know, and there was no winning that either, because it's like, you're either a witch, and so we kill you, or you die,
and
that means you weren't a witch, so you know you're free. But it's like, but you're still dying.
Yeah, I mean, it's a total double bind. And what torture does tend to produce in the real world is utterly psychologically wrecking people. But I don't think that's what we should be doing. And I mean, if it doesn't have any benefit to us just to destroy somebody's mind.
No, but I mean, in the film, and it happens, and in the film, it's used to be yet another layer to show
this,
just sort of the stack of atrocities and like sort of like shady dealings that this task force is, the acts they are performing in order to get their desired result, which is a very... You get the sense Josh Brolin works for the CIA, which makes sense because this is some like classic CIA bullshit where they're like, you know, like mind games and psychological warfare.
Yeah. I was actually...
But I'm pretty sure the reason they bring in the water is because they have this great shot where they're just favoring the water jug and you just hear these blood-curdling screams and then you see the blood sort of... I don't even know if you actually see blood trickle in, do you?
I think so, but I would have to rewatch.
You might see a little of it, but it's, you know, it's there to establish there's a drain in the floor. So, like, that's not good.
Yes, no, that is not a...
And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably so he could wash off the blood from the floor.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Which, like, wow, that's way more intelligent than I even could process
I think
for
that
this
makes
sort
sense.
of a film. But yeah, no, that makes sense. Because they shut the camera off, so they don't want there to randomly cut and there be blood on the floor. So he's just going to use the water jug to clean up all the blood. Oh, it makes sense now.
Okay. That does make sense. It's they put a lot of thought into the scene. So, I mean,
I know, because so much, even though it's a great film, so much of it's also surface, because that is an action movie thing. You want it to not be too high concept.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it also circles back.
I think it was also just so simple I didn't think about it.
Well, it's simple, but it is one of those, circling back to what I was saying earlier, it's one of those just kind of like meaningful details that grounds it.
Like, you knew it was important for something.
Yeah. I mean, in an action movie, they don't think most of the time about how do you get the blood off the floor or whatever, but in this they have just stuff like that. That was one of the things I was impressed by. Stuff like that.
I mean, what I love about this film too is like it works as an action film.
It does.
Like, my dad loves this movie, but like clearly not for the thematic reasons, just because it's an exciting
It is
film.
exciting and quite
But
fun.
at the same time, it's like almost like an anti-action movie where it's like none of the violence is cool.
No, yeah,
all of the violence is always like, this is pretty awful.
It's kind
guys.
of rubbing your nose in how unpleasant it all is, and the physicality of the violence. It's not like attractive or anything. It's just kind of like people being terrible harm being inflicted on human beings. But bringing it toward the big reveal, the reason that they're actually carrying out this mission, I find the kind of last half hour of the movie to be the most interesting, at least thematically, and one of the most tense.
So they basically established like the goal of the task force is literally just to shake things up and to cause a little chaos so the cartel, gets shaken up and is bringing someone back from the U.S. to meet with the head of the cartel so they can figure out where he lives, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Although I think they actually know where he lives already, so I don't know what the excuse is.
I can't remember.
I mean, honestly, I think it's just to sanction the murder of the cartel leader.
Yeah, basically. And
because they need an excuse to get there, and they need someone who will go there.
To do this.
Yeah, but so let's see. Chronologically, I mean, after that, it's this weird thing where it's like, clearly everyone's been up for like 24 hours and it's like 3 a.m. or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up driving and meeting with these immigrants that get caught by Border Patrol. Benicio del Toro's character, Alejandro, starts asking people like, he's trying to find people from a certain area that crossed.
Yeah.
He eventually finds them, and everyone else gets sent back, and he's just talking to them like, is there a tunnel? Like, is there, a tunnel that you used?
Yeah.
And then we cut from there, and Emily Blunt is clearly just fucking exhausted, but she just wants a drink, and she's just chain smoking, like, from pretty much after they storm Juarez for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
So clearly she's not doing well.
Yeah, no, she's traumatized, like, under her immense psychological duress.
I know, but so you think finally, like, well, okay, here's some levity. She's going to get a drink at this honky-tonk bar.
Nope, no levity.
I believe she runs into John Bernthal, I think is the actor's name?
Yes.
He played the Punisher in the Marvel show.
Yes, John Bernthal.
But I should say, before that, I guess she does get sleep.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the next day they go to like a bank and she's not really sure what's happening, but you find out it's because there was this person who's been basically laundering money for the cartel and putting in $9,000 or whatever increments into this account.
Yeah.
And she wants to do things by the book. So she's like kind of fighting, like, let me go in there and talk to them. And Josh Brolin says, you're not going to want to do that. But she does it anyway. She gets caught on the camera. Clearly that gets relayed to somebody because cut to, John Bernthal and her hooking up after drinking.
And
they're making out and he's emptying his pockets to lay down. And you see that he has one of the rubber bands, which is the exact same kind that the woman who was laundering the money for the cartel was using for the money bands.
And it's just this like, oh no shot. It's like she's...
And it's very disturbing because it's like...
She's...
at least before, nothing against her was personal. It's like people were trying to hurt her, but in more of a vague, like
she was
just
with
working
the
for
other
law
people.
enforcement sense. This is literally John Bernthal starts choking her to death.
And specifically sought her out and...
Yeah, like basically he's been hired. He's a crooked cop working for the cartel, and they want him to kill her.
Yeah.
And so he's like kind of pretending like he wanted to hook. I think actually he probably was going to hook up with her and then kill her, which is even worse.
Yeah, it was, they were midway, I mean, just kind of starting into actual sex when she noticed the the band. So
And that works too, because you're like, well, at least she's getting laid, and you're just a little like, and then the rubber band, and you're like,
and
God
she's
damn it.
also in a quite literally compromising position, like to see it at that moment, just to see her about starting into this into having sex.
It's pretty rough. And but she's saved by Benicio del Toro, who what's fucked up is I'm pretty sure they knew that this was going to happen, the task force.
Yeah, like,
and they
almost
just
like
sort
she
of
was
are like, okay, Alejandro, just follow her.
baked in a way, which is gross.
Yeah, she's like literally
That's,
bait.
like, it's terrible, but they're using her.
But she survives, but she's, again, just very, very scar. Like, she's pretty much like a hair away from actually dying.
Yeah. It's... And Emily Blunt conveys a lot through just, like... I feel like even just the way she carries herself in the scenes changes from the beginning, where she's going into the safe house, she's kind of assured, she's upright.
Her body language becomes much more kind of like closed off and hunched in.
Yeah. Which
makes sense. But, they do this interesting thing, and I noticed, it took me a couple watches to notice this, or to, I guess, really digest it, but there's so much going on, like you said.
Yeah, there's a lot to...
But there's this kind of touching scene where Alejandro is, like, staring at her, she's, like, putting her hair up, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "Yeah, no, I'm fine." And he says, "You remind me of someone that was very special to me."
Yeah.
And it's almost this, like, borderline... Well, you could see it as paternal, you could see it as, like, borderline romantic.
Certainly
sort of
warm. Like, it's probably...
But it's warm and affectionate, which is important because...
Yeah.
Pretty much from there on, you see him shift
to absolutely just
a monster,
basically.
Yeah. So I get a little muddled from here, but I believe the sequence of events is at some point she had went and talked to her supervisor. I think this was before she went to the bar.
I think so.
It could be after. But basically just being like, this is screwed up, like, is this okay? And he basically hints like this has been like high up the political chain, this has been sanctioned.
Yeah it's been endorsed by the government.
It's been endorsed. And then there's this great scene where they the next time she meets up with Josh Brolin, they have the armed paramilitary there.
Yes. Yeah.
And Alejandro's speaking Spanish with the immigrants and asking, like, okay, this tunnel right here, like, which ones do the drug lords use? And they go, that one, don't use that one. And he goes, all right, that's the one we got to go to. And you realize that they wanted to find basically the tunnel they're transporting cocaine or whatever other drugs through, so they can kill everybody in there, which is going to fuck up the supply chain, which is going to lead someone from there back to the cartel to tell them.
Right. So
that's the cover story. At least.
That's the official story.
That's what they've been telling everybody. So and this is another scene that reminded me of Silence of the Lambs, even though it's kind of done to the nth degree, but it's this really neat scene where everyone's using night vision. So it's sort of hopping between night vision, but then they do this in the film a lot too. It cuts to like an aerial overhead kind of helicopter thing. Yeah. Or it'd probably be a drone, actually.
Yeah, well, at this point. The night vision stuff definitely, I thought, maybe a direct homage to Silence of the Lambs, because obviously night vision or, night goggles or whatever were used to such memorable effect in the final part of that film. But yeah, no, I would agree that looked like a definite visual reference to me, or reference point.
But so they go in, and it's what you're expecting, even though it's very tense. There's a shootout with people. They do it in a good way, or they film it in a good way where you sort of just hear the gunshots off in the distance, and you're not really seeing anything in particular.
Yeah, no, it's kind of murky, and again, going back to that, it kind of denies you the usual visual pleasure you might get out of the scenes.
No, it's not like the cool, like someone bursts through the tunnel and is like shooting up people and it's like they dive over a thing. It's like, no, this is much more realistic where it's like you're just hearing the gunshots in the distance.
Yeah.
But so Emily Blunt gets separated from the group and ends up seeing something she wasn't supposed to. She goes out this tunnel, and this is where we see, and there's been kind of intercut scenes of this, but you see this Mexican policeman who's been transporting these drugs, and he gets kidnapped by Alejandro.
Yeah.
And she sees him, and she pulls a gun on Alejandro, and this is like the first big turn. And he doesn't hesitate. He just shoots her in the chest.
Yeah. I mean, she's wearing a vest or something.
She's wearing a vest, but you even get the sense he wouldn't have cared.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely cold and really kind of chilling how quickly he turns on her.
Because it's like, yeah, in a typical action movie too, even if there was a double cross, there would be that beat of tension. But they don't even. It's just like pop, like, you know, don't point a gun at me, and then he leaves.
Yeah, he across the next 20 minutes or so, he will engage in a lot of that sort of just startlingly nonchalant violence where he just kind of, he doesn't like, you know, build to it or anything. He just kind of kills people.
No, it doesn't seem like he takes pleasure from it.
No.
But he isn't bothered by it either. It just seems like he's at work. Like, this is my job. So she's understandably very pissed off. Goes back and punches Josh Brolin in the face.
Much deserved.
He proceeds to be just as sleazy as he's always been in the rest of this film. And he sort of like shoves her against a wall and puts his knee up against her chest.
Yeah, there's a definite...
And it's, you know, it's an important scene because it's also showing you how little they have any regard for not only this character, but the fact that this person is a vulnerable woman.
Yeah, they don't... I mean, isn't her presence there almost like just purely technical for them?
Yeah, well, they do have this big reveal. I forgot to mention this, but when they're planning for the tunnel raid, they discover that she discovers the only reason she's there is because there needs to be someone from some like I believe it's someone from the Department of Homeland Security. It's something like that. It's some technicality where they have to have some kind of local jurisdiction for them to operate. And that's it. So she really doesn't matter. Like, she's literally there just so they can point to a name and go, yeah, we had that person, so we were allowed to do this.
Yeah. So they... And the treatment of her by Josh Brolin in that scene is... like really degrading and dehumanizing.
It's like abusive. It's not even borderline abusive. It's like literal like woman beating type shit.
And that's like, again, the film keeps driving home that the men working in the name of the U.S. government are just as violent and abusive and shitty as the men running the cartels.
No, and I mean, they've been really misogynistic too. Like, you hear them talking. It's like when Josh Brolin meets the guy with the glasses, whose name I forget, earlier on, I can't even tell if it's a joke, honestly. He's like, how you doing? He's like, well, it burns when I pee.
Oh, God, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And I still don't know whether that was supposed to be a joke.
It's a bizarre scene, for sure. I don't know.
That character's really bizarre because he doesn't come back either.
No, he just kind of appears for...
And it's a weird action movie too where they'll establish like who you think are key players, but it's not like a regular action movie where it's like, no, and they get shot and everyone's mourning. It's like they'll just go because they were just working for that day.
Yeah. But getting back to Alejandro, he forces the cop who's been passing the drugs, who is the man we've been seeing at home the entire film, to take him to the drug lord's estate. And this was maybe the most tense scene for me, although I wasn't entirely, I could kind of see where it was going.
I mean, it's telegraphed, but it's still very tense. He basically tells him to pull over this, drug lord, and the cartel members, typical, like, do you know who I am? You probably shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
He tells him to get out of the car, and it's so sad because then when Alejandro tells him the cop to get out of the car, it's like you can see on his face he knows he's getting shot by someone, and he's fairly sure it's Alejandro. Yeah. So he leaves this car basically knowing like I'm going to die.
Yeah, it's a grim scene, and I mean.
And he does.
He gets die.
I mean, in a very shocking, even though you know it's coming. I mean, you might have thought he'd just get shot, like, and not die, but like, no, he gets a headshot, and he's just been another cog in the machine, so that
stepping stone.
Alejandro can get to this drug lord.
And when he does get to the drug lord, when he's walking into the backyard or wherever. And he sees them sitting at the table. It's very... When I was saying the most tense scene, I wasn't referring to them exiting the car. I was talking about this moment.
Okay,
but,
yeah, no, you mean this...
but the other scene was tense too.
Tense,
but this he just walks up with the gun and sits down and tells them to keep eating, which, I mean, it's really... It's a sadistic thing to do in a way, he would rather just get it over with and get shot if he's going to get shot, I would think, but...
No, he intentionally stretches it out, and it's been revealed earlier on that Alejandro's entire family got murdered, but very graphically, his wife got her head chopped off, and his daughter got thrown in a vat of acid or something. Yes.
It's...
So you you do understand his motives, but it's still very shocking because he walks in and this drug lord is just like a normal dad, maybe a more affluent dad, but he's, eating dinner with his kids and his wife.
And I mean, he's a bad man, obviously, who is just as evil as anyone else in the film. But still... Even though he's a...
Well, it's almost mirroring the scenes of the task force at the beginning, sitting around a table and discussing kind of very coolly the plans of who they're going to execute. It's similar. I think it's intentionally similar to a lot of the planning scenes of the task force where you realize they're not different. It's they're signing off on these atrocities and they never have to actually see them.
There's a definite parallel there. And even though he is a terrible man, the drug lord, I still was kind of shocked when Alejandro shoots his entire family first. And again, very nonchalantly.
Well, because you assume he's going to kill the dad, and you think maybe he'll kill the family after, or at least the wife.
Yeah.
But the order he does it, I mean, it's
the wife?
The drug lord, as soon as he sees him, he's like, okay, I'm going to die, so I don't really care. He's probably been assuming this is going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
But he just assumes, he's not going to kill my family, at least. Or if he does, I'm not going to see it.
But that's the...
But no, he shoots his two sons and his wife first, and then waits for, the weight of that to sink in before he shoots the cartel leader.
Yeah. And it's not... You don't get a real feeling of positive retribution or something like that,
No, it's not like a typical revenge film where you feel
good about the revenge.
A catharsis. This just feels mindless.
There's no justice to it. There's definitely revenge, but it isn't. It doesn't feel like something's been accomplished. It doesn't feel like he's been able to fix this this grief. I mean, this isn't.
No, and so we cut from that. to Emily Blunt in her apartment, and she's smoking on the balcony, and she hears something inside her apartment. This is actually, I think, having seen this film 3 times now, I believe this is my favorite scene in the entire film.
I would agree, honestly.
Because I think it encapsulates the themes of the entire film. So she goes in, and Alejandro is there, and he's sitting in the dark, and he's got a handgun. And he says, I need you to sign this document saying we did everything by the book.
And she
can't
do it.
She's like, I can't do this. I can't sign off on this, because she's a moral person, and she just knows how fucked up everything they did was, because she realizes, like, these are, like, the people I'm working with are exactly as bad as the cartel.
Yeah, and I think she realizes on some intuitive level that to sign the paper would be the most violent act of all. Just to sign that and to say that what they did was legitimate and acceptable and by the book.
Because it's her version of complete culpability. It's her version of, everyone else is doing these things, but on her end, signing the document is basically her sanctioning all of the violence
and saying, officially...
saying, I approve of this and I agree with this.
Officially, that the violence was justified and not just, senseless brutality, which it was, in fact.
And so she keeps saying, I can't sign this, and Alejandro just puts the gun up under her chin and says, you would be killing yourself. You have to sign it, or I will kill you.
And she just... Emily Blunt, again, amazing actress. And I think this is the first time we really see her, open up, fully to the viewer. We've known that, she's being traumatized by this the whole movie. But in this scene, she just fully breaks down into sobbing, and it's just such a primal thing to watch. She's just can't accept what's going on around her, and it's just very moving. It's very moving.
And Benicio does a great job too, because they had, this, less than a half an hour before that, there's this very warm scene where he's telling her, you remind me of someone, are you okay? And now he just does not care. He's just like, I'm going to kill you. Sign this stupid paper.
But she doesn't. She can't do it. And
I thought she did, actually.
Did she sign it?
I think she does end up signing it. I think that's why he leaves. Fuck.
Well, now I'm really sad,
I think that's why she's so
Sean.
Pissed off, too.
Now I'm really...
I would have to go back to confirm, but I'm almost 100% that she signs it.
Right. I think
because he gives her a pen too, and then
I think I misinterpreted the scene. I was I checked my phone or something. I don't know, but
damn. It's not. I think they intentionally don't. Again, it's kind of an anti-action movie where it's not, or thriller where it's not like a close-up of the pen. It's just like a really quick insert of her signing it or something.
Alas.
And he, wordlessly leaves. I think, but he has a great line before that, and he says, you should move somewhere quiet because they will be after you. And he says,
this is the time of wolves or something.
You should maybe think about getting another job, or he says something along the lines of, this is the land of wolves now.
Yes.
And he leaves, and she, runs to the balcony and puts a gun on him. And this is probably my favorite moment in the entire film, because she's holding this gun on him, and she can kill him, and he turns around and he literally squares off so she can get a perfect shot at him, and is just looking at her do it.
She doesn't do it.
And she doesn't do it. And then we cut to the ending, which is so heartbreaking, where it's this little boy whose father was this Mexican police officer.
Yeah.
Just being just looking at this bed where his father used to sleep, and it's empty now. And he talks to his mom, and his mom drives him to play soccer because this little kid loves playing soccer.
Yeah, and
they're playing soccer, and they show the kid, and they cut to the spectators, and it's like 8 moms and maybe 2 dads. And you realize, like, holy shit, it's because all the other dads got killed.
It's a common story for all of them, and
they're cut back to the little kids playing soccer, and you hear gunshots in the distance, so the coach like makes everybody stop. Like, not even that far in the distance either.
Fairly close.
And then when the gunshots stop, whistle back in, they get to play. And it's just so heartbreaking because it's not only that you realize that there's so many kids that don't have fathers now because of the fucking drug wars and the cartels. It's that you realize that nothing that's happened in this film has changed anything for these Mexican citizens.
For the people.
Like, it's heavily implied there's still violence and drug lords, and that nothing will change.
It's not, and even like Alejandro's revenge, all it accomplishes is just destroying another family and just contributing to the general constant sense of despair and grief amongst this community, for which violence has become just literally as much part of the texture as a soccer game.
I mean, I think what I love about this whole film is that the statement of it, which I totally agree with, is there is no winning the fucking drug war. Everybody talks about we got to win the war on drugs. You're never going to win the fucking war on drugs because people are always going to be on drugs. And there's always going to be people supplying those drugs. Whether that's, street level or Pfizer, there's always going to be drugs. So it's either government sanctioned or not, but you're not going... the drug war is not something you can win. Because you can't change human nature. It's like prohibition. It's like everything about drugs. You can't... There's no... I guess some people might consider it a war, but it's not really a war because you can't win.
Yeah, and I think, not to sound like a preacher or something, that I think one of the even deeper qualities of that lesson is just that violence doesn't win. Violence doesn't produce satisfaction. It doesn't produce peace.
No, and it's great because I've said this before, but it's like an anti-action movie because so many action films, and really just films in general, especially now that we're seeing like the rise of the superhero film as the big blockbuster, it's so much might makes right stuff, and you just sort of absorb it. But like intellectually, like, okay, whoever has the biggest gun or the biggest fist or whoever wins the fight, like that's not an actual win.
Because all you're doing is creating more suffering and perpetuating a circle that will only ever just eat itself on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the snake eating its own tail. Violence just begets violence. And it's been like that since the dawn of time. I mean, I can remember September 11th, and then we had that moron being like, let's go to the Middle East, and like we're still in that conflict.
Which it doesn't. How does that affect like you and I? Did that benefit the New Yorkers who lost loved ones? No. It didn't.
It didn't. We didn't even kill. I mean, it took us 10 years or more to even find the actual man responsible, and in the meantime, we killed and affected so many Middle Eastern citizens. And that's, I think, sort of what I think about when I think of Sicario and just the Mexican citizens, where it's like, does anybody win? I mean, like, does anybody not in government or in these task forces, like, they have no perspective on the fact that, like, their grandiose desires and power struggles, like, it's just you or I that suffer.
But
yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, wrapping up, I love this film. I mean, I've seen it three
very
times.
good. And I do want to say very briefly, we were talking about the weighty themes and everything. It's also just very entertaining to watch. I know that it doesn't quite sound entertaining, maybe with how brutal.
Yeah, no, I mean, like all of the analysis is just because I've seen this a couple times, and this is an analytical podcast. But like, you can watch this like my dad and be like, explosions.
It's a good thriller. It's
violence,
it's exciting.
Like,
it's
and it works as an action film, just as an like you don't even necessarily have to think too hard about it.
It's a movie. I feel. I mean, the violence might be a consideration, but I feel like I could recommend it to like a lot of people, and a lot of people of broad tastes would enjoy it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I had a moment where after I watched this the other day, I told Emily, this is probably his most accessible film, and she said, well, Arrival. And then I was like, then I had this moment where I'm like, I don't know whether, I guess Arrival would be technically more accessible, but
I mean, Arrival is less violent, but I feel like
but it's so
it's
weird
much
that
more like
I almost feel like Sicario is his most accessible, just in terms of like a typical casual viewer can go in, sort of have the idea of what an action film is, and it somewhat subverts those expectations, but it moves at a fast enough clip, and it's got enough stars in it.
Enough drama, and
just operates on such a level that I think it's the most accessible.
Yeah, I would probably agree. Certainly.
I mean, I would say Arrival. I'm struggling to think of the word.
I wouldn't say experimental, but it's certainly operating in a more like intellectual space. I mean,
I was gonna say that Arrival is also accessible, but it's just not as accessible because of the metaphysical stuff, I guess.
And also,
whereas Sicario, it's
a narrative based.
It's one of the few films actually that Villeneuve has done where there's nothing kind of supernatural or otherworldly in it.
Right. It's certainly more accessible than Enemy, or something.
I mean, Enemy is one of his. I think it might be his least. No, actually, I would say Enemy is his least accessible. I was going to say Blade Runner because it moves very slowly, but Blade Runner is such a huge franchise.
You don't even know what is happening necessarily, and with the spider. I'm just thinking about Enemy now, but
I know, but I think I mean, wrapping up, that's like what I love about Villeneuve and why I'm so excited about the new Dune movie, because like he is so versatile that you sort of. You know his vibe, and you know what kind of shots he likes and his pacing, but you can never really predict what he's going to do.
All you can generally rely on, though, as exemplified by this movie and many of his others, is that he's easily one of the most thoughtful mainstream directors. Like, he puts a lot of care and ideas into his films, and that's kind of rare with a lot of mainstream blockbuster films like these.
I mean, I went into that Blade Runner, which is a long movie, by the way, and I saw it in the theater, fully expecting this will just bore me to tears. Because I like the original Blade Runner, but like, and I'm a huge Philip K. Dick fan, but Blade Runner isn't, and the story it's based on, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Like, it's not my favorite of his. But it's just like he did such a good job of establishing this future Los Angeles and adding new things. And so I'm very hopeful for the Dune film that he's doing, because he is able to take these huge properties, which frankly, like, I don't know, it's almost shocking that they give him such big properties, because he is sort of an art director.
In a way, certainly he has...
Well, I would say he's got the best of both worlds, where he can appeal to a mainstream audience, but he still has that kind of indie art film sensibility that he can imbue and everything.
And that makes him an important bridge between, more art house abstract stuff and mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I would compare him to someone like Ari Aster.
Oh yeah.
And I really love this new generation of filmmakers where they are sort of combining this like more independent art house sensibility with this like mainstream appeal.
Right. Yeah, it's
because it's just a nice
best of. Jordan Peele is another one who leaps to mind.
Jordan Peele, yeah. It's not like I have anything wrong with like the bigger, typical like I don't know, Avengers or whoever does whatever big. But it's nice to see like a Blade Runner that's
it's
thoughtful.
Satisfying to get both like pure entertainment and also more complex stories and ideas and things. But if you're looking for that, and I don't know why you wouldn't be looking for that, I recommend Sicario. It was my first time watching it, and I quite liked it, and I'm going to revisit it, so I would say, I mean, it's 5 years old at this point, but if you still haven't checked it out, absolutely go for it.
No, I would definitely recommend Sicario. I mean, like, if you like No Country for Old Men, I think you'll like Sicario. Yeah,
definitely is similar.
Even though there's not so much in terms of like, I mean, they both have Josh Brolin. They both take place around the desert.
Roger Deakins cinematography.
Roger Deakins,
they're different, but nonetheless.
They're both great films, but yeah, I just love Sicario. And Emily Blunt, too, like, I can't say enough about her performance in this film. Like, there are so many heavy hitters, and she almost carries it.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't work if she were a lesser actress, but she does incredibly well. The main two, Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro, have this just amazing energy that they bring to the film.
They have this weird chemistry too, where
they're believable when they're in,
and they seem like they like each other, but it's like then they also don't.
Yeah,
But anyway, yes, I would highly recommend Sicario.
Check it out for sure. I've been Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean Thompson.
We'll see you next time.